The public hanging of sadistic camp Commandant Heinrich Schwarz stands as one of the starkest reckonings in the aftermath of the Holocaust. Known for his icy demeanor and merciless leadership at some of the Nazi regime's most notorious camps, Schwarz didn't scream orders. He signed them. With a pen, he condemned thousands to death, and with silence, he let suffering fester. What sets Schwarz apart was not only the scale of his crimes, but the cold efficiency with which he carried them out. He wasn't a wild-eyed fanatic. He was the bureaucratic face of evil, the kind of man who could look calm while mass death happened under his watch. This video explores his rise through the SS, his reign over camps like Monowitz and Natzweiler, and the brutal legacy he left behind. Most hauntingly, it leads to the moment where he faced the world's judgment, not in the shadows, but in the stark light of public justice. Heinrich Schwarz was born on June 14, 1906, in Munich, Germany, into a modest middle-class family. He trained as a photographer, a profession he practiced before turning his ambitions toward the rising tide of German nationalism in the 1930s. In 1931, he joined the Nazi Party and quickly aligned himself with the SS, marking the beginning of a career that would soon tie him to some of the worst crimes of the Third Reich. Schwarz's rise through the SS ranks was not meteoric, but it was steady and determined. His administrative efficiency and quiet loyalty earned him assignments within the camp system. He served at Dachau and later at Auschwitz, where he was placed in charge of the photo identification department, a role that foreshadowed his transformation from observer to perpetrator. In 1943, Heinrich Schwarz was appointed commandant of Auschwitz III Monowitz, also known as Buna, a sub-camp of the Auschwitz complex built to supply forced labor to IG Farben's industrial operations. This marked a significant escalation in his responsibilities. Monowitz was not an extermination camp by design, but its lethal conditions, starvation, disease, violence, and overwork, resulted in mass death. Schwarz played a key role in the functioning of this system, balancing corporate demands with SS brutality. Later, in 1944, Schwarz was transferred to Natzweiler-Struthof, another concentration camp where experimentation and executions were routine. His leadership there was marked by the same cold detachment that had defined his prior roles. By war's end, his name was associated with industrial-scale suffering, delivered without fanfare, but with deadly precision. Heinrich Schwarz did not scream in the barracks or wield a whip with theatrical flair. His cruelty was quieter, more procedural, and in many ways, more terrifying. As commandant of Auschwitz III Monowitz, Schwarz oversaw a camp where the goal was not immediate extermination, but exploitation through labor. Yet the conditions he maintained made death a near certainty for thousands. Monowitz was constructed to serve the interests of IG Farben, the chemical conglomerate building its synthetic rubber plant, Buna. Schwarz's role was to ensure a steady flow of laborers from Auschwitz's main camp. These workers were mostly Jews, selected not for their skills, but for their perceived ability to endure grueling shifts, malnutrition, and abuse. In reality, most lasted only weeks. The barracks were overcrowded, disease-ridden, and lacked proper sanitation. Food rations were deliberately inadequate. Injured or ill prisoners were declared unfit for labor and sent to Birkenau to be gassed. Schwarz not only enabled this conveyor belt of death, he optimized it. He kept meticulous records, enforced quotas, and worked closely with IG Farben to fulfill labor demands, fully aware that the men he delivered were being worked to death. Schwarz's sadism didn't come through outbursts of violence, but in his total indifference to human life. Survivor testimonies describe his presence as clinical, cold, and emotionally vacant. He avoided direct confrontations with prisoners, preferring to operate through a system he helped perfect, one where mass death was impersonal, routine, and efficient. In 1944, after his transfer to Natzweiler-Struthof, Schwarz assumed command of a camp notorious for its use in human experimentation. Though the worst of these experiments were already waning by the time he arrived, executions continued, and prisoners were still subjected to severe torture, forced labor, and systematic murder. Here, too, Schwarz showed no signs of resistance or reflection. He carried out his duties as if managing a company, not a death camp. What made Schwarz sadistic was not the theatrical cruelty often associated with other Nazi officials, but his chilling lack of emotion. He embodied the idea that evil doesn't always snarl. It can work quietly behind a desk, pushing paper that sends thousands to their graves. As the Third Reich disintegrated in 1945, Heinrich Schwarz tried to vanish like so many others. Captured by U.S. forces while wearing the uniform of a regular soldier, he hoped to escape recognition. But the name Schwarz was already etched in Auschwitz's bureaucratic corridors. His involvement in the mass exploitation and murder of inmates at Monowitz and Natzweiler made him a key figure in the Allies' hunt for war criminals. Once identified, Schwarz was extradited to Poland to stand trial in Krakow, not far from where many of his crimes had occurred. The charges were direct and overwhelming: war crimes, crimes against humanity, and direct command responsibility for the systemic death of tens of thousands. The prosecution presented transport records, survivor testimonies, and documentation linking him to selections, deportations, and death through forced labor. Schwarz sat quietly in court, impassive, cold, and distant. He did not deny the documents. He did not beg for mercy. His face remained stiff, as if he were still behind a desk at Monowitz, managing daily routines of death. He offered no remorse. To many in the courtroom, it was as though the system itself had taken human form, orderly, bloodless, and lethal. The tribunal sentenced him to death. Unlike some Nazi leaders executed in obscurity, Heinrich Schwarz's execution was formal and symbolic, carried out by firing squad on March 20th, 1947, in the Montelupich prison yard. Though not public in the modern sense, it was attended by officials, guards, journalists, and a few carefully selected witnesses, including camp survivors. On the morning of his execution, Schwarz was awakened early. He was offered a final meal, which he declined. When asked if he had any last words, he remained silent, true to the detached, emotionless posture he had maintained throughout the trial. He refused spiritual counsel. He was led outside into the prison yard, hands bound behind his back. A wooden post had been erected in the center of the yard, with a fresh layer of lime on the ground to absorb blood. The firing squad, composed of Polish military personnel, awaited him, uniformed, rifles raised. Snow had fallen lightly that morning, adding a strange quietness to the scene. Schwarz was tied upright to the post. A black cloth was offered to cover his eyes, but he refused. His jaw clenched, his stare blank. He stood motionless. No last-minute plea, no apology, no acknowledgement of the thousands he had condemned. The officer in charge gave the order. The rifles cracked almost in unison. Sharp, brutal, final. Schwarz slumped instantly. A medic stepped forward to confirm death. It was over in seconds. There were no cheers, no applause, just silence. Some witnesses wept, not out of sorrow for the man executed, but from the overwhelming weight of the moment. Justice had been delivered, not as revenge, but as a reckoning. The execution of Heinrich Schwarz was not merely the removal of a man, it was the confrontation of a system, one that operated behind desks and files, that measured life in labor output and death in quotas. Schwarz was no butcher with a knife. He was a machine operator of genocide, and on that cold March morning, the machine stopped. Heinrich Schwarz's story is a haunting reminder that the machinery of genocide is not always driven by raving ideologues or visible monsters. Sometimes it runs on the quiet efficiency of men like Schwarz, men who file papers, approve lists, and measure human worth in labor units. His demeanor never matched the scale of his crimes, and that's precisely what makes him so chilling. Unlike the theatrical sadists who relished violence publicly, Schwarz maintained a cold detachment. He represented a different kind of evil, the administrator of death, the man who made extermination efficient and suffering routine. His execution wasn't just about punishing an individual, it was about confronting an entire mindset that allowed industrial-scale murder to pass as policy. Today, His name is far less known than others who served the Nazi regime, yet his legacy of bureaucratic brutality masked as order lives on in the systems and institutions that fail to question cruelty when it's dressed in the language of duty and procedure. The image of Schwarz standing silently before the firing squad is more than historical detail. It's a symbol, a reminder that justice, when it arrives, must expose not just what was done, but how ordinary it all looked to those who allowed it. In studying Schwarz, we aren't just looking at the past, we're staring into the mechanisms that can still exist when humanity turns away from suffering in the name of structure. And so we must ask, how do we protect ourselves from the kind of evil that doesn't shout, but operates quietly with a pen and a plan?